Hi everyone, welcome to the first USBIA webinar of 2022. My name is Gavin Atwood. I'm the President CEO of the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce my colleague, Kate Kerkmans, who is the Vice President of Client Programs at the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado. Kate is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified brain injury specialist. She has 8 years of experience in social work. She has been central in the development of the country's first permanent supportive housing complex that is specifically designed to support people experiencing both homelessness and a brain injury. Using a systems theory approach to her work, Kate ensures that survivors, caregivers, families, and professionals are seen as the key to clients thriving in their communities. She brings a clinical focus to her work and strives to improve the integration of mental and behavioral health services into the brain injury community. Kate has delivered this presentation a couple of times before, both times incredibly well received. So hopefully you also enjoy her presentation. That said, over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you all for being here and for having me, and thank you to Colleen and USBIA. I'm excited to be here and share this information with you all. So we will just jump right in. I think it looks like we have quite a few folks here, so give me just a second. I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation going for you all. Should take just a second. All right, Gavin, can you just confirm that that's seen? The presentation's up on the right screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So I am here to talk to you all today about connection, loneliness, and finding meaning. This is something that has been at the forefront of some research for a while now, and something that I think, especially those of us that work in the brain injury world, have understood the importance of for quite a while. And I think that, you know, COVID has really brought it to the forefront, this idea of feeling disconnected and lonely. So I'm so thrilled that you're all here today to join in this conversation. We'll have some questions, time for questions at the end. So if you could just put anything in the chat, and Gavin will help me at the end by going through and letting me know what questions are out there. So we'll have a good at least 15 minutes to chat with questions at the end. So let's start by talking about what is loneliness. Let's make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. So for the purposes of my presentation and for the purposes of the research that my presentation is based on, loneliness is the discrepancy between the social connections you need and the connections you have. That makes it personal for each one of us. I understand that there are a lot of professionals on this call, and we're going to be talking about how this work can impact your work as a professional. We also have some survivors on the call and caregivers, I believe. And so, you know, some of this will feel really personal, but regardless of which category you fit into, I think we can all, as humans, you know, resonate with this and know that at some point in our lives, we have had some of these feelings. So even if you are a professional and plan to bring this into your work, take a minute to also think of yourself just as a human and maybe what this feels like, because I think that will make your professional work even stronger. So again, it's that discrepancy between what you need and what you have. We're going to call that the gap, and I'll be referring to this gap. What is already in your life and what's missing? What don't you have to really feel connected and fulfilled? What does that gap look like for you? Keep in mind that loneliness can happen when you are alone. It can also happen when you're with others. Have you ever felt that feeling of being at a party or a conference or a social gathering of some kind, and there are people everywhere and yet you still feel alone? Loneliness can feel like isolation, a heavy weight. It can make you feel invisible. There's probably some other feelings or thoughts that are coming up for you of what it feels like in your own experience. We also sometimes have an idea of what loneliness looks like in others. I think sort of this middle photo here of this young boy by himself, quiet, contemplative, looking out the window, maybe is what we have an idea of what loneliness looks like. But in fact, it can often be expressed in anger, irritability, and purposeful withdrawal. And we'll get into that a little bit later also. So here's where the research comes in. A lot of what we know now is thanks to a doctor named Vivek Murthy. He is the former and current Surgeon General of the United States. He served under Presidents Obama and now Biden. And under his term with President Obama, one of the things that came to his attention was this idea of the epidemic of loneliness experienced in the United States. And so he and some other really phenomenal doctors and researchers decided to find the data. Let's find out what's really going on so that we can point to this and see what are the consequences of loneliness. I want to specify that when we're talking about loneliness and these consequences, I am talking about prolonged loneliness. There is no specific date range around what prolonged means, but we're not talking about kind of a quiet weekend where you wish you had some friends to hang out with, right? We're not going to have any of these symptoms that we see here because maybe you moved and you don't have some new friends yet. I don't want anyone to get too panicked. So the data has shown us that these are the consequences of prolonged loneliness. In case the writing is small, we'll go through it real quick. Substance misuse is a really common consequence of prolonged loneliness. Premature death, high blood pressure, stroke, dementia, depression and anxiety. I think we all know that one. That's really common. It can impact your sleep and impact your behavior, cause it to be more impulsive, even lead to violence. The research has found that prolonged loneliness has the same negative health impacts as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. I'm going to say that one more time because I think this is a big one. The negative health impacts of prolonged loneliness are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So I think if we all knew somebody that was smoking 15 cigarettes a day, we might recognize that as a pretty significant impact on their health and well-being. And so I think this bit of data is super important because it can maybe help us all realize that this is a serious issue. So yeah, the outcomes for prolonged loneliness are real. So how common is this? What is the prevalence? So 22% of all of the adults in the United States, when surveyed, reported feeling socially isolated or lonely often or always. To give you some context, 55 million adults is more than those who smoke cigarettes in the United States, and it is nearly double the number of people with diabetes. I think we often hear that diabetes is a really well-recognized health epidemic in the United States. We know it's a problem. Smoking is still a really big problem. And this outweighs both of them by far. So when we're wondering how many people is this really impacting, the answer is a lot. So if you know somebody who smokes and you know somebody who has diabetes, then you definitely know somebody who is experiencing this prolonged loneliness. So coming back to Dr. Murthy, who again is the Surgeon General of the United States, he has this quote that I really like. Quite simply, human relationship is as essential to our well-being as food and water. Just as hunger and thirst are our body's way of telling us that we need to eat and drink, loneliness is the natural signal that reminds us when we need to connect with other people. What I really like about this quote is that it helps to remind me that loneliness is not a permanent state. If your body was hungry or thirsty, would you just think like, well, shoot, I guess I'm gonna die of thirst now? No, you would go and find some water, you would go and find some food, you would use those signals that your body is telling you to take action towards survival. So realize that the body's signals of loneliness are as much a survival mechanism as your pings for hunger and thirst. Digging into a little bit about that, the biological argument for connection. Why is our body telling us? Why is our body giving us these signals to go and find connection, to survive? If you look back a ways, back to hunter and gatherer days, if you're in a group versus being on your own, it's going to impact your survival. It's going to improve your safety because you have others around you that can help look for predators. It will increase the supply of food that you have regularly. It can also reduce the stress response, right? So we all know that that stress response, the fight, flight, or freeze that we experience when our body recognizes danger, is not good for our health. So having others around you to help sort of distribute some of that stress is good for us. It's good for our health and our well-being. So now this little tidbit is just me. There's nothing in the data to support this, but I actually think that this is the biological argument for nerds. Because if you have somebody else taking care of your food supply, somebody else looking out for predators, somebody else lighting the fire and finding shelter for that night, then it allows some folks to use a little bit of extra brain power into ingenuity and invention, to finding tools and finding, more ways for humans to thrive and grow. So again, that's just my little 2 cents. And I think if anybody says there's no biological argument for nerds, I think this is where we can point. Another really interesting aspect of connection of humans working in groups is gossip. It has been shown that gossip is actually helpful to human survival. Back in hunter-gatherer days, if we're thinking back to when we traveled in small groups, you may only be able to know a few people around you, right? Your knowledge of safety and of people around you can only travel so far. If you can connect with others, you can gather more information. You can find out where was the good food that was found or hunted, where are the animals? Is that chief going to be a good leader and provide us with safety and food? Is that other mother over there a safe person for me to leave my child with when I need to go do whatever it is I need to do? So, these connections, this ability to expand your knowledge through other people is, again, a biological argument for connection. So you may have heard the term in the past that we are hardwired for connection, and we've sort of gone through some of what that looks like and why. There are also immediate responses within the body when we have connection. So some of the hormones that are released, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, and your sympathetic nervous system response. These are all things that are released or occur in the body, often instantaneously when we have had a connection, whether that be a social connection with a great conversation or a hug or somebody showing us protection and safety. Keep in mind also that sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, or freeze response that kicks in, that can happen when you are alone or when you are in a group. So, just being around people does not necessarily equate connection. And we're going to get into this more. We're going to look at what does connection really mean. And it does not mean simply being around other humans. It sort of was that in the past, some of these examples we've just talked about, but as we have evolved, what is necessary for connection and that antidote to the sympathetic nervous system response is real connection. And we'll dive into that further, what that looks like and what that really means. Another physiological response that we have is called the Takotsubo syndrome. If anybody knows that that's the incorrect pronunciation, please help me out. That's the best I can come. I do not speak. It's a Japanese phrase. It's Japanese, and I do not speak Japanese. So I'm doing my best with the pronunciation there, but it's also called the broken heart syndrome. You may have heard of this in the past. What that means is that when our bodies are in a time of extreme stress, and this includes grief. I think we often see this with grief, which is, again, why it's referred to as the broken heart syndrome. What happens is the epinephrine hormone floods your body. It causes your heart to dilate and lose some of its pumping function. That causes blood to stagnate and back up into the lungs. And what those two things do is it causes shortness of breath. It helps you feel like you can't breathe, and it causes physical pain in your heart because of the dilation of some of the chambers of your heart. So I think we can all recall a time in our lives when we have felt grief or something really similar to it, a severe loss, and you feel it. Your body feels it. It's not a thought in your brain. It is physically occurring in your body. So this goes to show that we our bodies and our brains are working together to respond to these different sets of stress and occurrences in our life, such as grief, which is such a big inducer of loneliness. Okay, so so far this has been not the most uplifting presentation. I get that happens at this point. These are some pretty tough topics and some pretty tough subjects, but there is good news. So we know, right, what we've just reviewed, we know that there is severe or real consequences to loneliness, to disconnection, to grief, to sadness. So we're going to talk about now, what can we do about this? What are the concrete steps that can be taken to help us all improve, or help our clients, if that's the case, improve the connections in their lives? So again, going back to the research, what we know is that it is necessary to cultivate connection, and we're going to talk about real connection on 3 different levels, or 3 different stages in our lives to feel fulfilled. To really feel satisfied. So we're going to talk about what helps and what prevents each of these stages of connection. One of the things to realize when you're looking at these different stages is you may have experienced something in your life where you think, I have a great spouse, a great partner, and great friends, but I just feel emptiness. I just feel disconnected. Or I love my job and I go home and I'm happy, but there's still just something missing. So by being able to break up connection into these 3 different categories, it can really help us identify where we need to focus and where we need to cultivate and focus our energy to cultivate these connections. So we're going to start with the first 2. They're often pretty interconnected, although they don't have to be. So we'll start with intimate and social connections. These are sort of those top 2 types of connection that we need. What I want us all to do is we're going to take a quiet minute by ourselves. I want us to be able to recognize in our body what it feels like when we have sustained or found a good, authentic, genuine connection. This goes back to what we were saying earlier about, you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely or disconnected. So it's not about just being around others. It's about a genuine connection to feel that level of fulfillment. So if you don't mind, whatever's comfortable for you, we're going to take just a couple of minutes here, get comfortable in your seat, close your eyes if that helps, turn inward. Nobody can see you, so just take a minute to do whatever you need to do to really feel what's going on in your body. What we're looking for are sensations in our body that we can return to later to help us determine what is a solid, good connection. So I want you to take a moment, think about a person, a place, maybe it's a spouse, a friend, an organization, maybe it's a religious setting, maybe it's your pet, maybe it's somebody that's not with us anymore. But a place or a person that was a really wonderful support system, a genuine, authentic connection. Think about that, visualize that person or place, and spend just a minute noticing what's happening in your body. What are the sensations that you feel? What are the thoughts that are coming to mind? What are the memories? What do those feel like? If you can, just a quiet moment reflecting on what happens in your body when you focus on that strong connection that you've had. So for all of us, it's going to be a little different. If you need to take notes about maybe some things that you noticed, that might be helpful later to come back to. I can share for myself when I spend that time thinking about that, what I notice in my body is I feel relief. I feel like a big exhale. I feel like the mental filters in my mind that tell me what I should say or should be or should do get real quiet. They even sometimes go away when you're in the presence of a good, positive, authentic connection. So we may use that exercise again later of just noticing again what happens in your body to determine where a strong connection can be made. Nothing like some dead silence in a webinar, so thanks for bearing with me. So let's talk about what prevents connection. What are we doing that causes us to not have those strong bonds? Again, we're talking about that, what we call intimate or social connection. And intimate does not have to be a spouse. It can be, a sibling, a parent, a person in your life that just is able to connect with you at the most intimate levels, the person that you can be very vulnerable with. So I just want to make sure we're not limiting our thinking about who that person can be or who those people can be. So things that drive loneliness. Perfectionism is a huge one. I think we often come into interactions with others with this feeling of be your best self, be perfect, show them that you're happy, show them everything is okay. I think this happens a lot for folks after experiencing a brain injury. We don't want anyone to see what our deficits are. We don't want anyone to see what we've lost. We wanted everything's fine, I'm great, I'm perfect, and we hide the imperfections. We do what we can to please others so that they'll like us. And that's never going to be the basis of an authentic connection. So the more we can be ourselves, the more others are going to really see us. That definitely takes a state of vulnerability and a lot of courage. So I recognize that it's not easy. Two things that I hear a lot from survivors that I've worked with, this happens to all of us, but we're a brain injury community, so we can talk specifically about our experiences with brain injury, is this idea of shame and feeling unworthy. Again, often I hear from folks after a brain injury, after an accident, after an incident, whatever it is, the shame around what they've lost, about the identity that has been lost, around what they can't do anymore, the job, the family, the abilities, maybe it's a physical athletic ability that you used to have that you don't have anymore. And the feelings of shame and unworthiness that come with that. When we feel unworthy of connection, we're not going to let anyone in. We're not going to be okay to be vulnerable and share, because we don't think that anyone would be willing to take the time to get to know us, to want to know who we are now, who the new us is after something as earth-shattering as a brain injury. So I've seen all of these come up, in and out of the brain injury community, but they are all drivers of loneliness. If you see any of these in yourself, recognize that they are not helping you build connection. They are helping you stay isolated and alone. We're going to dive a little bit further into shame because really just because I see it so often in the work I do and working with others. So the best definition I've seen is from our friend Brene Brown, that shame is an intense feeling, painful feeling of or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and connection. Shame needs secrecy and silence to grow. So the less we talk about what we feel ashamed about, the stronger and more powerful it gets within us. And the stronger that message of unworthiness is going to refract in our brains, and therefore further drive isolation and loneliness. Shame very simply prevents connection, because if we are ashamed of who we are, why would we possibly believe that anyone would want to get to know us? I want to differentiate a little bit between shame and guilt. Guilt tells us that we've done something bad. Shame tells us that we are bad. So guilt can be a really positive driver of beneficial behavior, like, oh, I did that. That wasn't great. I feel pretty crappy about that. I feel guilty that I did that thing. I'm not going to do it again. That's very different than shame that just tells us that who we are at a very innate level is unworthy of love and belonging. So guilt is okay. Let's not do away with guilt. Sometimes it helps us. But shame really needs to be worked through in any way possible. So, the antidote to shame is empathy. If we want to get rid of shame in ourselves or help others, dive into their shame, what we need is empathy. This can be hard. So when we're looking, when we're talking to others, having empathy is really the opposite of that perfectionism, because we cannot have empathy for others if we are perfect. We have to be able to say even a little bit, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're going through because I have felt it too. Maybe not the exact experience, maybe not the exact level or the way that you do, but I have felt pain. I have felt loss. I have felt rejection. I have felt shame. I have felt whatever it is. And so I can empathize with you. When being with somebody and providing them with empathy, it also provides empathy to ourselves. So one way to get rid of or work through our own shame is by sitting in empathy with another. Empathy is not always having the perfect or right response. I talk to people who say like, well, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to upset somebody. I don't have the right response. It's not about having the right response. It's about being authentic in what you're experiencing and what's coming up for you in those moments. One thing I see a lot with the clients I've worked with in the brain injury community is this idea of comparative suffering. We all have a story, right? If you identify as a brain injury survivor, chances are you have a story to tell. And I often hear from survivors this idea of like, well, nobody should feel bad for me because mine's not as bad as that person, or somebody always has it worse than me. So I don't need your empathy. I don't need anything. I'm fine. Everyone's experience is valid. And everyone has the right to be heard and listened to. That doesn't mean sympathy or feeling bad for you or giving you charity, right? It's just listening and identifying that you've experienced something that's real and valid. Another thing we see a lot is, well, you may have gone through that, but wait till you hear what happened to me. Mine is worse. And while that can feel really valid in the moment, what that does is prevents others from being able to share authentically with you and can really be a driver of loneliness if you're not able to hear another story without trying to sort of one up them or talk about how much worse your experience was. So again, working through empathy helps relieve others of shame, and it can help relieve you of shame as well. So moving on to the third level of connection is collective connection or finding meaning. Meaning is the nourished experience of feeling like we're connected to something greater or larger than ourselves. So sometimes in my work, I call this the something greater. We're looking for the something greater to connect to. And this can change, right? As we find something, and especially those of you as are survivors or caregivers, as you see yourself moving through different stages in life, maybe through different stages of recovery, what that finding meaning is, what that connection is, what that something greater is, can change. So just be aware of that. Once you find something, doesn't mean you're kind of stuck in that one thing, because it may not serve you forever. So here are some different common connections that I see from folks. Very often, we hear of somebody's spiritual or religious practice can be the thing that they connect to as that something greater. Other really common ways of volunteering and helping others that can really help cultivate that feeling of being connected to something greater. For some people, it's exercise or getting out into nature. If work isn't an option for you anymore, then a hobby or volunteering, again, can really help you find ways and places to connect to that can provide that connection, that feeling, that sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. Quick tidbit that I love is that pets are actually, animals in general, can be found on all three levels of connection. So intimate, social, or something greater. Animals can be just a really fantastic way to find connection. I think, for those of us who have that animal bond, it's no surprise. So not everyone's journey to find that connection to something greater is going to look the same. It's going to be unique for you. No one else is supposed to understand your calling. It wasn't a conference call. This is up to you. What feels right in your body? There's no need to justify to yourself, to others, to your former self, what connection looks like, what that calling looks like, what that meaning looks like. It only has to make you feel the way that we sort of talked about before. So when trying to find out, what are those connections? Who in my life can I turn to? What feels like that authentic, genuine connection versus what is sort of the noise, right? There are lots of opportunities around to join this club or that club or talk to that person. You may have a friend from, your past life that's still there. We need to be discerning, right? I think that we all know, especially after a brain injury, our energy, our resources are very limited. So let's be wise in where we are spending our energy, in what opportunities we are choosing to pursue. We're not going to get it right every time, and it's okay to wander down a path and then realize, this used to be for me and it isn't anymore. Whether that's a friendship, a church, a hobby, a job, whatever it is, it's okay to realize and change our minds and try again. But let's do our best to be intentional with the choices that we're making. So we did that exercise earlier about the feelings in our body that are cultivated when we have that really positive connection. And I do that as a tool that you all can take with you, so that as an opportunity arises or a person calls up and says, hey, do you want to hang out this weekend? Or you're thinking, I have nobody and I need to reach out. Who do I reach out to? What am I looking for in a positive connection, in a meaningful connection? Use that experience in your body, right? And this is why we can take notes and write down, what did that really feel like? What came up for me as I was thinking about what I know, right? So that's my benchmark of a positive connection. And if I think about being around this other person or joining this group or taking this job, does that align with those feelings of connection that I had? Or does it do something different? Is it distracting? Is it fun? Is it maybe getting me back into some old behaviors that didn't serve me so well in the past and I'm trying to move away from? Use some discernment, check in with your body. Let's figure out what's really working for us before we exert any energy into connections that may not be serving our highest good. So we know what the consequences of loneliness are. What are the consequences of connection? The research went on to find out, once connection is improved, or those who have really strong connections on those three levels, the social, the intimate, and the something greater, what are the consequences of that? These are just a few of the finding. It's basically the antithesis to everything that was back on that first slide, but an overall longer and healthier life, not just longer, but better quality, better regulation of heart and respiration rates, which is interesting, increased immune responses to illness and wounds. It's kind of baffling to me that our body can heal a wound better if we have emotional connection to others. It just seems crazy, but the data is there to support it. And a 50% decrease in premature death. So just as the consequences for loneliness are significant, so are the consequences of connection. I have found when working with clients with brain injury, the response that I often get to this conversation is that, well, there's nobody. That's it, I'm alone. I don't have a single person that will help or support me. I've got nobody. So what do I do now? So what I do is very rudimentary, but I really have seen it work. If I don't, you can print this out or just draw 3 circles on a piece of paper and label them intimate, social, and collective, or something greater. And even if you don't have anything to write down today, that's why I think having it on a piece of paper somewhere readily available for you can be really helpful. Start writing things down. So, the first thing I'll say to somebody if I'm working with them through this process is, okay, you say you have nobody, but you're talking to me. I'm here. And you've been, a client of the Brain Injury Alliance for 6 months or 10 years or whatever it is. So our staff, we are a part of your connection. Maybe you're not utilizing it to the, utmost, but let's look at that. Let's explore ways that we can improve how you're utilizing our services. Write down my name, write down the other staff member, that I know that you work with and have been working with, write down their name. We are a part of this. I heard you mention that your, brother-in-law called you the other day and you hadn't heard from him in a while. Is that something to cultivate? Can we write that person's name down? Maybe it's a therapist or another professional. Maybe you tell me that you, volunteer at a soup kitchen once and it was great. Let's write that down and see and explore if that is a way to, cultivate a different connection. So it can feel very bleak for people. Again, social isolation is rampant in the brain injury community, and COVID has done nothing but make that worse. So it can be really difficult to figure out where to start, right? So I would say, write some things down in these circles to the best of your ability, and then find the gaps. So maybe you have a whole bunch in, socials where it might be professionals or some friends, and you're lacking in the intimate or collective, something greater circles. So then we know that that's where to focus our attention. That's where we're going to focus our drive. Where can we look to try to improve those levels of connection? So again, pretty silly rudimentary tool, but it can really be helpful when you just don't know where to start or are convinced that there is absolutely nobody in your life to provide that level of support. These are the references that I just want to throw out in case anybody wants to write them down and learn more. Together by Vivek Murthy, this is a lot of the data that we've talked about today. He has a ton of data, but this book really encapsulates a lot of it. Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski is a fantastic resource for cultivating connection, as well as the power of vulnerability, and a lot of teachings by Brene Brown and her work. So I'm going to leave that up for just a moment so that if anybody wants to write them down, they have access to them. My slides are going to be available also. And we're a little bit early, but I see some stuff coming up in the chat. So I'm going to give this about 10 more seconds for folks to write down anything they may be interested in. I will stop sharing my screen, and then we can take some questions.
Kate, Gavin here. We do have a couple of questions. I wonder if I could put them to you.
Please.
The first one talks about how do we recognize loneliness in others, that is to such a degree that someone you would never expect harms themselves or commits suicide. So, what are those kind of warning signs that you think people should look out for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, again, recognizing that loneliness doesn't always look like that lonely boy in the chair that we, the quiet person that doesn't engage. It can look like that, but it can also look like people who lash out in anger. It can be, inhibitive behavior. I think that when you look at things like shame that tells us that we are not worthy of connection, maybe there's someone in your life that you're inviting to a gathering, a party or whatever, and they say no and they repeatedly won't show up. So you think, well, they're probably fine, because if they were lonely, they would come to the party I've invited them to. But that message that we get to ourselves that, do not go to that party. Nobody there cares about you. Nobody wants to talk to you. You are not worthy of that attention. That's a powerful voice in our heads. So I think that if you're a professional, I'm not sure who asked this question. So if you're a professional, I would recommend adding loneliness to any sort of screening tool that you use. This is something that I've talked to my staff about in the past. Ask, are you feeling lonely? And if you think it's an odd question, or maybe somebody's not going to get it, talk about that gap. Is there a gap between the social connection that you have and the social connections that you want? And let's explore beyond friendship, right? Because friendship's the obvious one, but let's talk about any sort of real deep, intimate connection. Let's talk about, something greater and finding meaning. So even folks that seem to really have their stuff together and they're, seem fine and they're doing great, especially since COVID, right? I think there probably isn't a single person around that hasn't felt some level of disconnection, at least increased since COVID. So it looks different for everyone, and ask. What's a better way to find out than just asking?
Thanks, Kate. Second question here, asking about, have there been any research studies done on the mind-body connection, sense of self and identity, and how do these things change when a person's brain is just disconnected from a part of their body?
That is a big question. I would say I am sure there are research studies out there. If you're asking me to name them off the top of my head, besides what a lot of Vivek Murthy's work, so I would recommend reading that book to hear about it. Gavin, can you repeat the question? There was a lot in there. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, it was about research studies done on the mind-body connection, sense of self and identity. And then there was a second part about how do these things change when a person's brain is disconnected from a part of their body. So there was kind of like a two-part question.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend doing some research on finding some of those studies because it may be there. I'm not sure if you're talking about like a literal disconnection, if there's been a brain injury that caused that, or a more figurative disconnection from part of their body. I think that in my own experience, brain injury is it's really common in brain injury to see people's identity shift drastically and predominantly in a way that is a loss of identity, losing a sense of self, whether it's physically or emotionally or intellectually or an ability. It happens more times than not. So I think that, you could definitely find some research around what that looks like. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score that's coming to mind for me. So that's one that you could look into. And please feel free to reiterate the question if I'm not answering it, or if somebody wanted to unmute and ask if I'm not really hitting the mark, please do so.
Thanks, Kate. In the remaining time, I haven't got any other questions, but I believe that you had some FAQs. I'm not too sure how much longer we have, but
yeah, we've got some time.
Yeah, so seeing no extra questions, why don't you dive into those?
Sure. So two of the most common questions I get, and I keep in my back pocket in case we have some extra time. The first one that I get the most frequently is social media. Does social media count as connection? Can social media, help improve my sense of connection in any way? And I think, again, with us all kind of stuck at home, social media has become so much more prevalent in all of our lives. And I think the real answer is it depends. And that's just such a great social work answer. But the truth is, if you are sitting on your couch at night, feeling lonely and disconnected and don't know what else to do, the scrolling through some social media feed is really not a fantastic way to find connection. There's plenty of studies to show that can really harm our mental health for a variety of reasons. So if it's just sort of scrolling through your feed, not going to be a great use of your time and can actually pretty much do some harm. That being said, if, especially due to a disability or your circumstances, it's hard for you to sort of get out into the world and participate. There can be, groups, if you were participating in a specific group about a topic or an interest or a hobby of yours that happens to live on social media, I think that's great. Go for it. Definitely engage in that. Be specific and purposeful with your time on social media, just like you would with anyone else. I heard a woman say recently, and I really liked it, that she considers social media sort of the front porch of her house, and she wouldn't let anyone into her social media world that she wouldn't let stand on the front porch of her house. So, with a lack of physical resources and energy, be cognizant of where you're spending your time. And if engaging on a specific topic or interest or hobby interests you, then yeah. And if social media has to be the way to get there, then I think that's fine. I saw something in the post come up about Stephen Porges's work on the vagal nerve, and thank you. That's a great recommendation. Actually, I have this is another great book. It's called The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy, but it is really about that mind-body connection. And it is based on Stephen Porges's work. He did the foreword for this book. So that's another one. Thank you for pointing that out. The other question that I get a lot is about culture and how do cultural differences or similarities impact the connections that we need or have. And I think that it's a really great thing to keep in mind as far as, you may have cultural norms in your heritage that say independence and, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and don't ask for help and show that you can do it alone. Or you may come from a culture that says, family and be around everyone and everyone in a, communal effort together. And it almost doesn't matter if you are paying attention to your own desires for connection of what you need versus what you have. So your culture may really influence the level of need that you have, and it may really influence the level of connection, the level of need versus the level of connection. If you're from a culture that has 32 family members around at all times for every meal, and that really fills you up and does it for you, and that gets you to the place of what you personally need to feel connected and good, fantastic. And if you come from a culture that says independence, do it by yourself, and you do, and you really feel okay with a lot of alone time, some of us feel really good and get rejuvenated just being by ourselves, that's fine. There's no judgment around any of it. There's no right or wrong. Again, it is what you need versus what you want, what you have, excuse me, and how big is that gap and what can we do to narrow the gap. So those are the two FAQs that I get, that I keep in my back pocket in case they came up. Anything, it doesn't look like there's anything else in the chat for now, Gavin?
No, I don't believe there are. Colleen, on a logistical front, how much longer do we have, or are we kind of wrapping up, or?
There's about 10 minutes left. If anybody wants to unmute maybe and ask Kate some questions, please feel free to do that now. And if not, then we can let everyone go a little bit early.
I'll also hang out. So if you'd rather ask a question in front of a smaller group, that happens sometimes too. Happy to just stay on until everyone's had a chance to ask.
Hi there, may I ask Kate a question? Was
Please.
it you that said in the beginning that you had started the first kind of a home for brain injury? And how did you, because that's a major problem. I'm in Georgia and whatever. Basically, there's no place in Georgia to go. They have closed down everything. And of course, I'm getting my favorite phone call from Ohio. And my tricky thing is I usually have a thing on my phone that says, can't talk, still cleaning up the blood. We don't recognize the number, but that's different. Use your humor to get you by stuff. How did you get that going? Did you get a government grant, or, because that's a huge quest?
I'll give you the real short answer, and then I would be happy to chat with you more in depth, at another time. Yeah, so we have partnered with a contractor and a developer, excuse me, and the city of Denver. And so we are in the construction phase of a 72-unit apartment building. It'll be permanent supportive housing for folks with chronic homelessness and a brain injury. It has been, there are many, many hands in the pot, and the Brain Injury Alliance was selected as part of a bid to be the primary service provider on site. So we're really excited about it. And as I said, my information is in the chat. Please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to share any further details with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great question. People often ask about how it was funded. And, just in the interest of not delving too deep into it right now, that's something that Kate can talk through with you. About a $23 million project. Okay, Colleen, I think we may have exhausted any questions, so I'm going to hand over to you to.
I have one question.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So I just have a question. I'm a brain injury survivor, and I'm here with my mom, and I was wondering if you knew if there's been any research. I have a depletion of emotions. Like I understand what I'm supposed to feel, but I'm like dead inside. I have no feelings, but I understand them. And I'm 4 years post my surgery, and like nobody has answers for me.
You're not the first person I've heard of that has had that symptom post injury. I'm I don't have any research off the top of my head, although the group was able to come up with some with the last person who answered that question. So maybe there's somebody else here that has come across some resources that could be beneficial. Just trying to think, Kimberly, real quickly, if there's anything that comes to mind. I'm not coming up with anything off the top of my head, but I will continue to think about that. I'm going to write your name down, and if I can think of any resources for you, I will certainly pass them along.
Right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, best of luck to you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for sharing.
Anybody else for the greater good? Well, I know
I
Colin.
have a question.
Go for it, Carrie.
I am pretty much bedbound. How do I get relations with others?
That's a great question. I think that there is no simple answer, certainly. I would start, again, I know it seems really simplistic, but I would start with that simple tool of the 3 circles and write down intimate, social, and great, something greater. And let's start by figuring out what you do have, right? Where are the connections that you have? And maybe utilize those individuals or those support systems or those professionals to help expand. I would encourage you to talk to anyone in your life that is supportive, that you do have, and let them know that this is something that is really important to you and it's something you want to work on. If we don't verbalize it, others, first of all, may not know or may not really care to pay attention because it can seem kind of scary. So write down who you do have in your life, what are your support systems, and see if one can lead to another. And if not, I know it can be really vulnerable and scary, but ask for help, ask for suggestions, think about, interests that you may want to pursue. And again, with that, technology can be your friend in some of these situations. Are there groups online or through some form that don't take personal interaction or don't go outside of your particular abilities at this time, and see what you can delve into there. And there's no simple answer, and I hear you on that struggle.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Kate, someone pointed out that the Love Your Brain Foundation also has great meditations online for mind-body connection.
Excellent.
Known obviously for the yoga that they do, but sounds like they've got meditation available as well.
Excellent, thank you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been a brain injury survivor for almost 15 years. And as time has gone on, I have actually felt even more ostracized from my family.
Mm.
And those whom I do feel connected with from almost spiritual, intimate level, don't live in my state, which is Colorado. I live in Denver. So anyway, I guess I don't know if this is the forum right now to ask you how to find confidence in myself when I'm around my family, because I'm around them a lot. And I mean, brothers, sisters,
Mm-hmm.
My daughter, my dad. So yeah. And we're going to a family reunion in a week, and I'm actually really stressed about it because normally it would be fun, but I do feel like rather
not use that
within
one.
the 15 people, I
Okay.
will still feel really lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Rather not use this one.
Yeah, Stacey, thanks for asking that question.
It's okay.
My honest recommendation would be to see if they're,
Okay.
if you're open to it, to working with a therapist who understands brain injury. I can take this opportunity to plug the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado. We've recently started a clinical services, mental health and therapy program. So if you're open to counseling, again, my contact is in the chat. I think working with a counselor that understands brain injury could be really helpful in rebuilding some of those skills. So if you're open to it, please reach out and we'd be happy to get you connected with a counselor that could support you through that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
If there aren't any more questions, we can go ahead and wrap things up, and I'll just repeat to everyone that this has been recorded. We'll send everyone that was registered a link to the recording once we have that ready, along with the slides that Kate used today. And I'll also include Kate's information in there. Again, quite a few of you asked for me to put that back in the chat, so I'll put that in the email as well, and if you'd like to reach out to her. But thank you very much to both Kate today for presenting. Gavin, thank you for your time. And I appreciate you both being here to help kick off our first webinar of 2022.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.